Why is it so important now for the United States to take these extraordinary risks? The idea of the Pentagon acting as a force of restraint is astonishing.
Well, the Pentagon has been the dovish component of the U.S. Political military system. The Pentagon's putting bounds on what the Congress and the neocons around Biden want to do. This has been very clear. It was recently made even more clear when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, a couple of weeks ago, suggested that it's time for the war to be ended before it gets worse. We must move to some form of diplomatic negotiated settlement. That's the chair of the Joint Chiefs. If anyone in the civilian sector says that, they get vilified and demonized. So the Progressive Caucus in Congress proposed a very mild resolution. It was so mild as to be embarrassing, suggesting that maybe we should think about diplomacy. Within one day, the attacks were so vicious that they had to withdraw it. Even Henry Kissinger, not known as a dove exactly, even he gets demonized and vilified if he dares to say what almost the entire world is calling for. Let's move towards diplomacy and negotiations instead of escalating the horrors. But when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs says it, he's immune. And kind of interestingly, in the main establishment journal, Foreign Affairs, there have been articles by highly respected civilian policy experts calling for some moving towards diplomacy and negotiations. And they get away with it there. But if anyone outside those narrow circles says it, it's just a wave of denunciation, even worse in England, somewhat mixed on the continent. You can understand the U.S. position in a way. The U.S. is gaining enormously from the war. Europe is being badly hit. Europe is harmed by the sanctions much more than Russia is. In fact, the whole German-based industrial system, sophisticated, complicated system, which has been the core of the most successful economic system in the world, has been the core of European development. It's now threatened, seriously, even threatened by possible deindustrialization. Europe is being hit quite hard. Russia, of course, Ukraine is being devastated. Russia is suffering severely, not so much economically, they have ways around it, but tens, if not hundreds of thousands of casualties. The United States is degrading. Many commentators have pointed out that for the United States, it's a bargain. At a small fraction of the military budget, they're able to degrade and destroy a large part of the military forces of their major military adversary in the world. That's a bargain. Furthermore, geopolitically, Putin's criminal invasion of Ukraine gave the United States a gift on a silver platter. It drove Europe into Washington's pocket. That's been an issue way back to 1945. One of the major issues in the Cold War, all the way through, has been whether Europe would move on an independent path, whether it would become a third force, as it was called, in international affairs. Certainly Europe's capable of that. Enormous economy, sophisticated, advanced culture, advanced technology. Will they follow the policies of de Gaulle, Europe from the Atlantic to the Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik, Mikhail Gorbachev's Common European Home from Lisbon to Vladivostok. It's always been a possibility. Putin killed it, at least temporarily, by driving Europe into Washington's pocket. It's a wonderful gift to the United States, in the short term at least, as long as Europe is willing to suffer the effects of hanging on to Washington's coattails. May not. It's a bitter fate. Of course, for the rest of the world, it's even worse. Almost the entire world is calling for negotiations and diplomacy. India, Indonesia, Brazil, now under the new government, the entire global south, the United States and Britain, the traditional warrior states, they're pressing to continue the war. In fact, official US policy remains to fight the war, to severely weaken Russia, their adversary on the international scene. So here's a chance to severely weaken Russia at quite a cost to Ukraine and much of the rest of the world, and possible escalation to terminal war, but it's considered a good bargain so far. We have, since the United States doesn't is not considering diplomacy and negotiations, the media do not cover these issues. They loyally keep to state policy. So we really don't know a great deal about the prospects for negotiations. But a good deal of material has leaked out, partly from Ukrainian sources, partly from others. Most recently, a couple of days ago, from Israel, where former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett described his efforts to mediate, which were stopped by the United States. We know that we have pretty good evidence that last March there were negotiations underway under Turkish auspices. We know that British then Prime Minister Boris Johnson flew to Kyiv and informed the Ukrainians that the US and Britain are not in favor of this. It was followed by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who presumably gave his standard message that the war must continue to weaken Russia. Anyway, the negotiations collapsed. Since there's almost no coverage, we don't know much about the reasons, but this has been repeatedly possible. Maybe now, as Bennett said, the only way to find out is to try. Can't learn anything about it unless you try. Well, there are pressures all over the world to try, whether the United and also within Europe, because they are suffering. But the United States and Britain so far are pretty adamant, except for the military, like General Milley. So that's about all we know at the present.